Welcome to the Apostolic Forum. I'm Dana Thompson, and today we have an exciting show for you. We're going to talk about the gospel of the kingdom, the gospel of the kingdom. The Word of God says in Matthew 6:33 to seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added. So there is some good news that Jesus presented to his people, to the body, about the gospel of the kingdom. And here to discuss this topic with me is John Metcalf, who is no stranger to the Apostolic Forum. How are you, John?
Doing fine, thank you, Dan.
And also we have the beloved Ernest Mabry III. How are you, Ernest?
I'm doing well. Glad to be beloved.
Yes.
Well, gentlemen, you know, we've talked about the kingdom quite a bit, but I don't think we've actually have thread together gospel with kingdom, you know, where we've actually put it in a phrase where we actually say the gospel of the kingdom. So I know that when people hear the gospel, they think of it as in receiving some type of news. But what is the difference between the gospel of what we hear every day and most of the meetings, if you were to go to a church, especially during the Easter, weekend? What is it that we hear as far as the gospel there versus what we see preached throughout the entire gospel, where Jesus talks about the kingdom? What is the difference between these two gospels, or is there a difference?
Well, Jesus came preaching the gospel of the kingdom, or the gospel of heaven, and we've gotten away from that because what we've done is we've preached the gospel of salvation. Now, the gospel of salvation is not wrong; it's just incomplete. But Jesus came preaching the gospel of the kingdom. And, everybody will say, yes, that's what we're doing in our church or, our television program or in my book or whatever. But, to be perfectly honest with you, what we've done is we've come in the middle of this particular thing, this concept of the gospel, the good news. And, what we've presented has been good news. But we have said man is a sinner, and he needs to be saved. If he's saved, he doesn't go to hell. We keep him from going to hell, and he gets to go to heaven when he dies, and that's fine.
But that is good news.
Yes.
Oh yes,
When
it
you
is
think
good
about
news.
it, that is good
Absolutely.
news, yes.
But the difficulty is that we really have no idea of what we're supposed to do and why God would do something like this. We kind of flounder around looking at Bible verses and trying to make them all on, getting people to make a decision for Christ.
Right. So you're saying that basically, John, that sometimes the gospel of salvation can serve as a means to an end?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's always the concept of so-and-so made a decision for Christ. And the difficulty with that is that if I make a decision for Christ, I'm the one that made it. And I can make a decision against Christ.
Right.
So when we talk about the gospel of the kingdom, we're dealing with something that's a whole lot more than a decision for Christ. Not that a decision is not good,
Surely.
but it's shallow. There's a whole lot more to it.
Right. Oh, that's a good point.
Well, I agree. The gospel that we've heard most is the gospel of salvation, and it is a message that needs to be heard, obviously. The problem is that we spend a lot of our time preaching the gospel of salvation to people who are already saved, in hopes that those who are not saved would somehow be attracted.
Right.
Well, Jesus did preach the gospel of the kingdom, which literally means the good news of the rule of the king.
Yes.
And so there's something that's adjunct or completes the picture of salvation. In fact, 1 Thessalonians 5:23 talks about our spirit, soul, and body should be preserved unto the coming of the Lord. When we make this decision for Christ, that's dealing with our spirit. The kingdom is dealing with the whole man. It's dealing with the spirit, dealing with the soul, and even the body at the last trump. and how that we are to interact with one another and the world while we're here. So it's comprehensive, and that's what we need to understand.
Wow, that's really good. You know, it's amazing because when I think about the gospel of salvation, the way you guys presented it, it's almost like you're inviting people to a place to come, like you're saying, Ernest, where Christians every day is being preached to about this salvation. And they're saved, you know. They've been taken out of the kingdom of darkness and translated into the kingdom of light. So they've been saved from this present world system of destruction. That's what salvation means to me, you know, from that standpoint. But it seems like when the gospel of the kingdom in Matthew 28, where Jesus tells them to go out and preach the gospel of the kingdom to every nation, it seems like it's one that doesn't promote people just coming into one geographical location to hear a message, but actually going out and expanding, you know, the good news of the message of the kingdom. And I guess what I'm saying is that when we meet someone, what I've always learned when I was more in an institutional setting, that when I met someone, I was to bring them to church so they can get saved.
That's right.
So the whole thing is, you know, bring them in there to hear that message of salvation. Whereas the gospel of the kingdom, it sounds to me as if, while it acknowledges and appreciates the gospel of salvation, that it presents more. There's just more to it than just saying that I'm saved. That there's a destiny and a purpose for each and every purpose to fulfill in Christ.
Amen.
Do you see that?
Absolutely, and I think the you know, the other thing I was talking about is that, you know, if people could begin to understand what God's purpose was for them to be saved, you know, it would make a whole lot more difference. You know, we're dealing with people who, well, let's face it, the gospel of the kingdom is that Jesus is living within me. He's my Lord, He's my Savior, and that my life reflects His character. And, you know, we've all been around Christians who their lives don't reflect the goodness of the Lord.
Sure.
You know, they're nasty, they're arrogant, you know, and such were some of us.
Sure, sure.
And, you know, if the gospel of salvation is going to be effective, it really needs to change people's lives. That's why we talk about the gospel of the kingdom. If we know that God's whole purpose was to have sons, that His whole intent was to make provision for man before He made man, it begins to change the way I think. With the gospel of salvation, I've got to continually maintain this thing. But when I realize that God has made provision for me, for me, it's very easy to surrender myself to God, because I know that He's my Father and He takes care of me.
Now, when you say that God has made provision for you, can you clarify that a little bit more?
Sure. That's the concept of, in Revelation 13, it says that the Lamb was slain before the foundation of the world. You know, we think in terms of Christ being slain at Calvary, which is true, but that is in time and space. But in eternity,